So this is what people who are 5 feet tall do at every open mic before they read. The microphone always has to be adjusted. So this is I'm going to read a couple of chapters from the memoir I'm working on. This is about the middle of the book. At this point, it's the mid-1990s. I'm in my early 20s, and I work in a shelter for survivors of domestic violence, which has been pseudonymed New Start. And I work the night shift. I work an actual 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And sometimes when the hotline is quiet, which is never, I get to sleep. I was never comfortable around children at New Start. One of the things I liked best about the night shift was having uninterrupted conversation with the women while their kids were asleep. I woke some mornings, though, to the sounds of children screaming and running down the halls outside the hotline office. Usually the child was followed by a mother saying, "Be quiet, people are sleeping." But sometimes mothers slept through the noise their children made. One morning, when I was still asleep, a 6-year-old girl came into the office. She reached over the pillows I'd piled under my head and pulled my hair. "Play?" she asked. "Play now. Mama no like sleep. Mama no like play." Though I had offered the mothers care and reassurance at the kitchen table the night before, I didn't have any for her. I pulled my hair out of her grip and pulled my blanket over my head. "Play?" she persisted. "No, honey, not now," I said in a fake happy voice. Some of the evening volunteers loved children. The Tuesday women brought glitter, glue, old magazines, and cardboard and sat in the playroom making collages while the women made dinner. Not me. When children were around, I stood on my toes and breathed shallow until someone got them out of the way. Sometimes I learned things I didn't want to face from the way women treated their children. It was Labor Day 1996, and Kathleen had just given birth to Mark. The rest of the women had left before the holiday to go back to abusers or on to transitional housing. None of the new women were due to move in until Tuesday. Kathleen, Mark, and her 2-year-old Laura were alone in the 3-story building. My supervisor had failed to arrange vacation coverage. Kathleen was pregnant with Mark when she came to New Start. She had scars on her arms from protecting her belly against her husband's attempts to beat Mark out of her. When he was born, Kathleen called him perfect, and it made her hate Laura for being loud and messy and too. I went to the shelter Sunday afternoon, my day off, to make sure Kathleen was surviving the weekend alone. "You fucking terror," I heard her yell as I opened the door at the top of the stairs. "You little terror, leave your goddamn brother alone. He's mine, you can't touch him." Laura whined. She sounded as if she didn't have the energy to cry. Kathleen came downstairs a few minutes later and saw me in the hotline office. "Oh, hey," she said. "I didn't know you were here. You don't work Sundays." "I don't. I just figured you'd be lonely this weekend, so I came in to see how you were." "Oh, thanks. Well, I'm still here. That's something. Have the whole house to myself. Can't complain about that." "Nobody's been in all weekend?" "No." "Figures." I liked Kathleen. She was funny and smart. "You been here all weekend?" I asked. She sat on the futon in the hotline office. Mark was in a blanket in her arms. I didn't know where Laura was. "Went to my mom's yesterday afternoon, but that's about it. There was a big party in town. I saw a bunch of old friends. It was great to see everyone," she said. I was going to lie to them about where I was living, but I didn't. Just came right out with it. I left Andrew because he beat me up so bad I almost lost my baby, and now I'm living in a domestic violence shelter in the city. They were horrified, but in a good way. Like horrified Andrew would do that to me. They believed me, and I was afraid they wouldn't. "Least people can do is believe you," I said. "Yeah, you got that right. And wouldn't you know, my high school boyfriend is still single." "Not a bad thing," I said. "Not that I'm looking for anything serious right now," she said. She looked at Mark. "You're the only man in my life for a good long time, aren't you? Aren't you? Look at him, he's perfect." "He's cute," I said, and smiled. Not because he looked any different than any other baby, but because I knew I was supposed to express enthusiasm about people's children. "Hey, that stuff Rita said about you being gay, that true?" Kathleen asked. Rita, the other night person and only former New Start resident on staff, had outed some of us to the other residents. As I heard it, there was a kitchen table conversation about lesbians, and some of the women had made homophobic comments. Others were convinced they never met a lesbian, so to challenge them, she told them about us. "Yeah," I said. "Cool. I mean, I never would have guessed looking at you, but it's cool. Good. Good. I had this friend in college who was gay. He was nice. Wonder whatever happened to him. I lost track of everyone after I dropped out." I was stunned that Kathleen could talk so calmly to me after screaming and swearing at her 2-year-old. disrupt the harmony of my connection to her, that she'd get defensive and avoid me, like some of the other women did when I gave them warnings for not doing their chores. Kathleen liked me. She told me I was the coolest person on staff, and at the time I wasn't feeling cool anywhere else in my life. It was easy for me to maintain my silence when I saw a woman mistreat a child. I didn't have children of my own, I told myself, so I didn't understand what it meant to be a parent, especially a parent watching your child start school or sit up for the first time or learn to walk in a shelter. Too many generations of white women from my class background have gone into neighborhoods poorer than their own and clucked disapproval at every kind of parenting that isn't smiling and restrained. I was afraid of replicating an oppressive power structure, so I said nothing to Kathleen or any other woman who yelled at her kids or ignored their needs. It was hard for me to see women with children without thinking of what they gave up. Kathleen might not have dropped out of college. I fear I didn't stand up for Laura because I blamed her for that. At least half of the women at New Start said they left their abusers because of how much they loved their children. I almost cried when a woman told me the thought of her daughter believing it was okay for a man to berate and hit her made her so scared that she packed the car and left. Seeing her daughter thrive became more important than how much she loved her husband or how much she believed in marriage for life no matter what. I heard women talk about how their children saved their lives, while I watched them exhaust themselves feeding, comforting, and chasing them around the shelter, making sure they didn't put toys that had been on the playroom floor in their mouths. I always felt differently when I saw men with children. In college, professor couples with young kids lived in apartments in our dorms. When I saw a male professor follow a 2-year-old around the dining hall, or remove a dirty diaper, remember to wipe, replace it with a clean one, and put it on in the right direction, I felt like some sort of monumental social change had occurred. When women professors gave care to their children, I worried they wouldn't get tenure. There are so many griefs in watching a child grow up in a shelter. If they're starting to talk, their first words could be curfew and warning and food stamps. How do you watch a 3-year-old develop curiosity about the world when the best world you can give him is a shared kitchen that smells like disinfectant and a playroom where most of the toys are broken? How do you teach a child that her place in the world is important when she's not allowed to tell anyone, even her teacher and her new best friend at school where she lives? How does a 7-year-old explain why he came into 2nd grade halfway through the year? How does he say goodbye 30 days later when his mother gets a bed in a transitional housing program 50 miles away? Why was it so hard for me to show the children at New Start compassion? Isn't it disingenuous to work for social change while treating the next generation like they're in the way? I could not have understood this in the years I've worked at New Start, but I became incompetent around children because giving them warmth would have opened more of my grief than I was ready to face. I felt resented as a child and came to resent myself. Other people's disapproving comments about my family's new cars and big parties got stuck in the back of my throat because anything someone said about me having more than I deserved felt true. I had too much of everything, but mostly too much of my father's attention. My father always looked at me like he didn't know if he wanted to praise or swallow me, like he didn't understand the difference. It felt unjust. I didn't ask for it. I couldn't stop it. I could only hope that my mother would distract him long enough for me to escape to my bedroom, close the door, and draw or color for as long as my family would leave me alone. I didn't have armor to protect me from his impositions, so I protected myself by forgetting or pretending to. If I had shown more vulnerability to the children of New Start, I may not have been able to keep ignoring my father's amorous smiles or the fact that I felt trapped every time he hugged me. Traumatized kids are usually full of naked need. Unlike their mothers, they haven't learned how to act strong or play the role of a deserving victim so that a shelter worker feels moved to give away kindness or information. In those years, I needed to believe that I had learned everything I knew about domestic violence from college classes. I loved working with the women in the shelter because their adult defenses helped me save too. But children are too hopeful. They're simple enough to cry because they miss their fathers, and wise enough to understand that sometimes love has to be stolen, and a half-asleep shelter worker is often better than nothing. So the next piece is very short. It's only a few pages, and it is later in the book. I have just had a crisis about my own abuse history and it's making it very difficult for me to keep working in the shelter. Working at New Start had become almost impossible. I called in sick for almost 2 straight weeks and hadn't washed my dishes in almost that long. I couldn't remember the last time I'd cleaned the kitchen or bathroom, definitely not in the month since my housemate left for an extended work trip. There was a pile of empty styrofoam cartons from the Buffalo Wings takeout place on the kitchen counter. I hadn't taken out the trash in weeks, and there was no room left in the bag. At least 5 plastic containers of leftovers were growing mold in my refrigerator. If I lived at New Start and made this kind of a mess, I would have received so many written warnings that they would have asked me to leave. But because I wasn't poor or in immediate danger, I got to neglect the dishes, the kitchen, and the trash when my grief got bad. I had so much more freedom to come apart than the women at New Start did, and in response to so much less trauma. I struggled with chore check and bed check. I hated all the ways our talk about self-determination conflicted with the restrictions those of us at the bottom of New Start's pay scale were expected to place on shelter residents' lives. Nobody feels like getting up in the morning, but 9 o'clock meeting is mandatory. Nobody wants to push a brush around a toilet bowl, but anyone who doesn't can expect a written warning. But having no rules is just as scary. For some women, a house full of other people's dirty dishes and bits of food attracting rats felt as chaotic as the homes they'd left. It's hard to live with other people if you don't develop a shared understanding about who is supposed to take out the trash or change the toilet paper roll. If you don't, the person who can stand mess the least or is the most afraid of conflict is eventually the only person who ever cleans the bathtub. Was my nightly visit to the chore check patronizing or boundary setting? Or did it depend on something intangible like the tone of my voice? And when I knocked on women's bedroom doors and said I was just going around to say goodnight, did they know I was really trying to find a way to glorify the task of looking into their eyes to make sure they weren't bloodshot? Elizabeth came to the shelter on a red-eye flight from Albany, where she had worked as a nurse managing the cardiac floor of a hospital. She gave up her back porch and her monthly night out with friends to live in a place not even her mother could visit. There are roaches in the kitchen, and it will be weeks before the exterminator comes, so she eats ramen noodles for lunch and powdered instant soup for dinner. She tells me she used to be famous for her mashed potatoes and gravy as she tries not to think about the watery chalk taste of the boxed stuff she's making for her son. She tries not to miss her herb garden or the job where she made more money than any of us. Her husband almost killed her. Child Protective Service almost took her son. It's better here in a place where the chore chart dictates which part of the house she has to clean each day in order to appease a 23-year-old night shift worker. I had never given birth or kept a patient alive after bypass surgery or left a batterer, but I got to decide whether she and her son had a place to sleep based on how satisfied I was with how well she mopped the kitchen floor. Elizabeth tried to explain the circulatory system to me one night. I didn't get it. I had always hated science. I never took biology in college. I never took biology in college because I spent all my credits doing internships at Battered Women's Service in order to become qualified to look at the faded living room rug and determine whether the woman assigned to common areas had done a good enough vacuum job. I hated checking Elizabeth's name off the chore list most. The uncomfortable question I didn't ask myself was, why was it more appalling to ask educated white women to follow shelter rules? Was it any less patronizing to impose restrictions on women who spoke only Spanish or worked in convenience stores? Instead of finding answers to these questions, I left New Start. The slights and crises and inconsistencies and questions about my own history got too heavy, and I buckled. A social change foundation hired me for a temp job and paid me nearly twice as much to bundle brochures and sit at information tables. My supervisor there treated me like I walked on water and told me nearly every day how amazing I was for having done shelter work at such a young age. My leaving the shelter didn't resolve anything. It only meant that someone else dodged mice and roaches while they watched women do what they could to mop the dinge off the kitchen floor in time for 11 o'clock chore check. Thank you.